You want to know what I love? I love when a character that's meant to be evil or the villain of the story gets their spotlight stolen by another character. An even bigger evil, an even bigger villain, maybe the real villain of the story. I love that stuff. And the reason I love it is because it's so difficult to do. It's like having two villains or two evils compete for the exact same position, the same spotlight. However, you don't want identical characters, so they're usually entirely different. One character offers this and the other offers that, and you have to figure out which one is more impactful, which one's more powerful, which one do you want to be the main focus. Naturally, trying to figure that out is really fun. It's really engaging, and when you see stories start to implement that type of shift, when you see characters starting to jump away from their original position into completely different roles potentially, you know you're in for such a beautiful experience with some of the best dynamic character storytelling that you could imagine. Before you even think about replacing, removing, sharing the spotlight, whatever it may be, I think you need to have such a strong foundation. Like, you need to know what your villain represents within this world, what they're capable of, what's their possibilities, what they're able to achieve. You don't have to give away all of the details, but you need to give away enough. Enough so viewers, readers, people that are experiencing this world and these characters are hooked, and that they're so hooked that they would never think that this character would ever get replaced, or that they would get removed from the story, or that an even bigger threat is looming within the background. Because that's the whole point, right? You're trying to hide an even bigger character behind the murkiness and the uneasiness of your already established foundation. A lot of work has to go into that foundation. This comes normally with story progression and character progression and characterization, all the ins and outs that you would expect, but there can easily be more elements to emphasize the point of the unknown. For example, establishing beautiful character dynamics that work back and forth in tangent with each other. So even though you're playing directly with the unknown, you as a viewer or a reader are still unsure on who's going to come out on top within that spotlight. A really recent great example is the Penguin, which is a spin-off of the Batman, and there's two characters within here that fight for that spotlight. The first being Oz, the main character of the story, and the second being Sofia. The thing with these two is that they work off each other directly, but Sofia doesn't really come into the story or into her own per se till a little bit later. Your whole attention is of course on the main character, Oz, and you need to understand how Oz operates. See, Oz is not a good person. He is horrible. He is disgusting. The things that he does, the ego that he has, the things that he feels like he deserves, and the path that he will take to get it is disgusting. It's very difficult to root for Oz as a main character because quite literally he is the villain. He's not a person that you can support, but the dynamic between him and Sofia starts to bloom. See, there's a lot of relationship problems between these two. They have history and a pretty interesting one from a power dynamic perspective. All you need to know about Sofia is that she's from a very, very powerful family that Oz used to be a simple, humble driver for. But because of that ego, Oz has a lot of ambitions and he wants to do things his own way. And simply that includes throwing Sofia down a well, making sure that she is no longer a problem. And this is just the surface. This is just to push Oz to a position of power with Sofia out of the picture, but this is what starts their dynamic. This is what kickstarts their back and forth tug of war. And it's a beautiful tug of war. But see, the only reason that it works so well is because of that Oz foundation. There's a lot of times within the Penguin that you will root for Oz to fail. That's the point. You can't help but oddly side with a lot of Sofia's motives and even her ideology, what she's been through, what she's experienced. She's the better person within this picture. Because of that, a lot of her reasoning is kind of justified. It's important how that clashes with Oz, the foundation. It's like two waves hitting each other. And when they clash together, they kind of cancel each other out and you play this back and forth game. Strong foundation is always important. You're trying to reel in as much attention as possible so another character can combat against it and have this really cool back and forth. But what if the foundation is a little bit more sneaky? What if it is hidden within the background already, or something that lurks within the shadows? Like, they still obviously have a presence, they're still very powerful because that's needed, that's the point, but not as powerful as being a main character. Silco and Jinx is a very complex situation, and it goes far beyond what you would naturally expect. This is first and foremost a relationship. Similar to actually Oz and Sofia are entangled right from the beginning, but it's because of very difficult and murky circumstances that neither of them are willing to actually confront to each other, because that kind of unravels the whole dynamic of their character. But when it's important, it can be approached. See, what you need to know about Silco is that he's very meticulous, but he's also very passive. Silco is smart. He plays things slow and he likes to do things his own way, but he'll never be overly aggressive. He'll never stand in a position that forces his hand. If anything, he's very true to his feelings and himself, even though he's viewed as the villain and that he is a evil character for all of the deeds that he's done. The way that he treats Jinx is kind of like a daughter, and it's not clear. It's not healthy. It's very toxic. It's very problematic. But in a world that is continuously unforgiving, the way these two bounce off each other is superb. These are not two waves clashing against each other like the Penguin, but more like a wave clashing against the beach. Silco, in a foundational sense, is that of companionship, of a father figure, of a relationship. They view each other as these oddly equals, and it's important to have this emphasis because the more effort that goes into Jinx's uncontrollable character, the more the spotlight blooms onto her. And what this leads to is a very specific point. So you have your foundation out the way, right? Your two pillar characters, your two core characters, and then you have the looming monster, evil darkness in the background that's rapidly becoming bigger and bigger. You need to have a merge. And what this merge is basically giving them more of the spotlight than those original characters. How would they work in that spotlight? What would they do? How much attention would they pull? How would the viewer and reader react? What you need to know about both Jinx and Sofia is that they are very, very powerful, both by their actions and their thoughts, but also their presence. They demand all of your attention. And this is a powerful weapon to have. When you're demanding so much attention from something, you are clearly taking it away from something else. You can't share the spotlight when something is so glaringly gorgeous in your face. You have to seek what that gorgeous thing is, and what you arrive to is two incredibly beautiful characters that you start to explore. You start to give them more time. You start to build their character. You start to fill them out further and further. And it's almost to the point where they start to build their own foundation, their own pillar within the story. Now obviously, there's a lot of ways to go about this. Sofia, for example, is technically the villain to Oz, but because of their character dynamic, the reason she is the way that she is because of Oz. So there's a ton of understanding. You don't really have to tread new ground. However, what you do need to flesh out, and something that they do beautifully within the Penguin, is her relationship with her family, because her family is a bunch of mobsters, and that gets confusing. This mobster family that she lives in are filled with people that think they know better, people that think that she isn't much of a problem, people that think that she isn't worth anything. Basically, the way that they look at her is nothing, that she is not a part of this world, that she shouldn't be, and that she only causes problems, until she takes things into her own hands. See, deep down, I like to think that Sofia only wanted to be respected. She wanted to be listened to, just like any other person, but because she was a woman, or because she didn't have enough power, or because she didn't have enough presence, or even the ideology behind the mobster lifestyle, she was considered weak. And this is a really great point to work with. You start to show more of this within the merge. Her quote-unquote weakness is now her greatest strength. The family that she had, she doesn't need them. And she makes it very clear, very obvious what her intentions are. And even if she becomes a little bit conflicted, a little bit unknown, it's because she's still human, and that's the beautiful part of her. She's not just a ruthless killer, which is what they tried to claim her to be this entire time. She's only ever been just a normal human that was a part of a very twisted family. And while she knew the ins and outs of the business, she was never directly a part of it. Now that she is, it changes everything, but specifically she wants to run it her way. Not within her father's footsteps, not within the mob's footsteps, her way. If you don't know anything about Jinx, 1, you're missing out, but 2, she's a very unstable character, mentally and emotionally, and there's good reason for that. See, Jinx isn't technically the villain, she's more of the main character, but she starts to become a problem very quickly. And it's because of certain things that happen within the story that leaves her alone and puts her on the path with Silco. See, Jinx was a good person. She was a good child. She didn't have it easy, but she had good people around her. And because of those incidents, she's kind of forcefully thrown into this path of sink or swim. And Silco helps her. Now, you could say that because of the toxic relationship between Silco and Jinx, that he is the reason why she spiraled out of control, but it's very apparent that it's not actually the case. While it can be a half leading hand to direct her down that way, he was never truly forceful about it. He wasn't trying to directly manipulate her emotions or her personality. It's because of very personal things that start to traumatize her. And for good reason. That trauma is apparent, it's suffocating, it's ever growing and self-destructive. And you can tell directly when she starts to become more of an issue, more of a problem, when that merge puts more emphasis on her and backseats Silco. Even he doesn't really know how to focus on her. He doesn't know how to reel her back in. He doesn't know how to control her, which puts emphasis on the fact that he never did to begin with. Jinx's story is tragic, it's horrifying, and it just keeps tumbling out of control emotionally. It's something that breaks you down and you can't help but feel really, really sad for her character. And innocence being taken away, losing people around her being the cause of that potentially, not finding comfort in anyone or anything, and just being alone. And when you're alone with all of your problems and all of your trauma, it just gets worse. And she becomes sick and sinister. But funny enough, there's still a part of her, albeit small, that fights for something. That fights for what she remembers, that fights for comfort, that fights for love. If you haven't noticed, the reason this is broken up into 3 different parts, the foundation, the merge, and now the new world, is because it's the start, middle, and end. And the new world is exactly what you think, the start of something new. This character taking so much of the spotlight that they become kind of the point of the story, the focus, the reason why everything operates to begin with. And of course, that's kind of rightfully earned. You're putting in all of this work, all of this characterization to make them so important. You would want to show off what's possible, what new ideas, what new things, what new world do they bring in. Both Sofia and Jinx are painfully human, and they do things their own way. It's a beautiful part of what both of their characters represent, what they come to find. See, in the end, for both of them really, they weren't treated the way that they should have been. They were molded by people and a world that was unforgiving, was not kind for them. And the characters that they become, the world didn't like either. So who cares about the world when you can just make one that fits you? And that's exactly what they do. But see, they shape it in a way that you wouldn't think. It's that part of themselves that everyone else viewed as being negative. The emotion, the weakness that they had is now ushering in their version of a world. And of course, that weakness between them is now reinforced. It's complex. It's no longer a burden, but maybe more of a empowerment. Now that they have the spotlight, they can show people just what they're truly capable of, without spiraling into the depths of villainy or evil, but a beautiful recontextualization of their character and something new for them. A new character for a new world that they could potentially build. But the saddest part about all of this is that a lot of times these characters don't live to see their new world. They may start to change, they may start to bloom into what they were always meant to be, but because they were never truly the main focus of the story, because they've taken the spotlight, most of the times they can be killed. And I don't want to put that energy out there for either Jinx or Sofia, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't nervous for either of their outcomes. For Arcane Season 2 and the finale of the Penguin.